she belongs. She is home.
Hey everyone. Hello. Thank you for joining us on our Sunday gathering for in Sk'aliCh'elh-tenaut's legacy. Super excited to get to our guest today. And I don't know, was it Joe or Stephanie who started the Christmas hat thing?
It was
You, Stephanie. Good job. Very quickly got our hats for dolphins. Just saying. But want to check in with everyone real quick, and then we'll get right to our special guest. So, Christina, how are you?
I'm good. I'm good. Happy to be here. Feeling real Christmassy and happy to hear what Paul has to say.
Yes, super excited. Casey and Stephanie, how are you?
We are great. Happy holidays to everyone. And yes, we're so excited to talk to Dr. Spong.
Yes. Deborah, how are you?
Happy to be here, holding space for everybody who takes time out of their busy holiday schedule to sit and listen to what someone else has to say. Mwah.
Awesome. And I really look forward to what he has to say. Howard?
great to be here, and it's very special to have you here, Paul. Looking forward to our conversation.
Thank you very much.
And Joe. Joe was our special guest a few weeks ago, and he asked if he could be on our Hollywood Squares. And so, so here he is. And Joe actually is the one who put me in touch with Dr. Spong. So thank you, Joe. How are you?
I'm doing well. I'm happy to be here. Thanks for letting me join the Hollywood Squares, and I really look forward to hearing what Paul has to say today.
Well, right before we get to Dr. Spong, I just want to play a quick video for you guys.
Well, you know, there were almost 70 orca taken out of the population in Puget Sound, Georgia Strait, central British Columbia in the 60s and 70s. Most of them are dead. And what I figure is these whales have done a lot for us, a lot for people, you know, in terms of entertaining them and educating them and so forth, you know. And now we've got a chance of doing something for them. We know where these whales belong. You know, we didn't know anything about them at the beginning. Now we know who the families are. So we've got a chance to give them a new life. So why not? They say she's happy, but how do you know what's going on in the mind of a whale, you know? What is happiness for an orca? When you see orca in the ocean, you see an animal that's living in the midst of a social group that's having a great time with one another all the time. And I would say that's probably happiness for an orca, to be at home with their family in the ocean. If Corky had a choice, I think she'd rather be at home in the ocean.
All right, Dr. Spong, thank you for being with us today.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
I'm a little raspy, you guys. I'm getting over being sick, so Joe and Howard are gonna help me out. But Dr. Paul, there's a wide range of people who are watching. So there's a lot of people who know you and your work with OrcaLab, and then there's a lot of people who probably don't. So do you mind to kind of just start us from the beginning, maybe just how you got into this work and how you developed OrcaLab to start?
Yeah, sure. Well, I was initially hired to do a behavioral study of an orca at the Vancouver Aquarium in Vancouver, BC. It didn't take me too long to understand that that was a very inappropriate environment for her. It was a small concrete tank, just about 50 feet long and I think probably about 20, 25 feet deep. It was tiny. It was built for dolphins. Actually, it would have been too small for them too. But In any event, I started doing this work, and ultimately things happened along the way that convinced me that I was dealing with a creature that was very interesting, I suppose, would be a good way of putting it. Intelligent, capable of doing all kinds of interesting things, including playing tricks on me and stuff like that. But I ultimately took a position against her being in captivity, and that lost me my job. And I went on from there to actually fairly soon afterwards to a capture, the aftermath of a capture in a place called Pender Harbor on the Sunshine Coast in north of Vancouver. And there was a group of orcas that had been captured the night before, and they were being sorted into pens and getting ready for transportation to marine parks. Often in California, but other places in the world as well. And Corky was one of them. Corky was, didn't know the name Corky at that point, of course, but Corky was among a group of whales that were captured, and she was taken away and sent to a marine park near Los Angeles called Marine End of the Pacific. And she survived there for many years. I'm not quite sure how many years before she was moved to SeaWorld in San Diego. At the time she was captured, she was moved with another member of her pod, and they were ultimately moved to SeaWorld in San Diego together. Orky, as he was named, didn't last that long. I think about 18 months after they went to SeaWorld. And so at that point, SeaWorld had many other orcas, principally from Iceland, in their tanks. So Corky continued to live in that situation for many decades now. And what happened to me was, once I became sort of aware of more about the family groups from the work that we were doing at OrcaLab and work that others like Dr. Michael Big and Ian McCaskey were doing, understanding that orcas live in family groups and that they stay in their families for life and so forth. It became really a question of what to do about Corky. So in 1990, the Bella Reeve Foundation held a meeting in Switzerland that I attended, and at that point, I talked about Corky and the possibility of her going home and rejoining her family. And so that's a big focus of what I've been doing ever since. There have been many, many different avenues to this journey. One very big one came, it's interestingly, from Austria, which is a landlocked country, no connection with the ocean. But a man named Nicky Entrup came up with the idea of creating a banner made of patches of cloth that were sewn together. And the patches expressed the thoughts about children, basically, about Corky. And this ended up being an incredible work of art. It was ultimately over 2 kilometers long. And we did many, many things with it, took it to SeaWorld and tried to surround SeaWorld. They weren't too happy about it. But in any event, we had a fair amount of media attention to that. So there was quite a lot of focus on Corky at one point. And then I think probably for many years, she's disappeared into the background of thinking about captivity. And then, you know, the Blackfish movie happened, and that sort of reawakened that whole interest in what was going on in captivity. And so that was a few years ago now. But we're at a point I think, with particularly with the idea of ocean sanctuaries being built to move captives to, and the very fortunate happenstance, which was that an American named Michael Reppy, who was very much involved with Earth Island Institute in looking at issues of dolphin captivity and what was happening in Taiji and in Japan and so forth, sailed twice single-handed across the Pacific Ocean to Japan. And on one of those occasions, carried a spinnaker with a big "Free Corky" slogan on it. And so Michael, he's an incredible person, dedicated much of his life and I think probably the entirety of his wealth to the idea that Corky could come back home. Now, at the point at which we started this idea, we were really thinking of building a kind of a halfway house for Corky in a place called Freshwater Bay near on Blackfish Sound, near where we are at OrcaLab. And unfortunately, so much time has passed since then that the idea of rehabilitating Corky and teaching her letting her learn how to catch live fish again, and then just letting her go back with her family, has kind of become a little problematic at this point, I'd say. He's been in captivity for so long, 54 years. Can you imagine it? 54 years now, as of just a few days ago, December the 11th. And we're, I think, concerned about just letting her go back into the ocean, and that we think now that it's probably better for her to be cared for when she comes back to her home waters. And so Michael Reppy, that is, has created what it will be a sanctuary in a place called Double Bay on Hansen Island, which is near where we are at OrcaLab. And Blackfish Sound is a place that Corky's family comes back to routinely, year after year, primarily during the summertime, but also at other times, even in the winter during the year. And so the idea that Michael is working with, and that we're working with him about, is to create essentially a captive place, a space. It would be an area of about 14 acres, surrounded by netting. She would be put there and housed there and looked after there. It would have to involve SeaWorld staff, people that know Corky well and have cared for her over many years. And it's a fantastic place for these people who've been looking after Corky to come to. It's an old fishing lodge. I think it has 26 rooms in it, something like that. And it would house the staff that would be looking after Corky. And so the idea that we're working with right now is to try to create a space for Corky to come into, where she'll be cared for, where she'll be in her home waters again, where she'll be able to meet her family again, because there's a narrow entrance to this bay in which the orcas pass by often. There'll be audio, acoustic communication between them. And with no doubt that if they hear one another, they will communicate with one another, and that the whales and her family will come and visit her. And they, by the way, include her brother and a sister. They were born since Corky was born, but so she's never met them. But they share the same set of calls, and as you probably know, orcas have dialects that they use to recognize one another with. And so we don't know what happens after that, but at least Corky would be back in her home waters. She'd be being looked after, and she'd meet her family again. And I think those are all huge pluses for her. So the question is how to do it.
Howard?
You want me to answer that question?
That is a big question. The question. I don't have
Okay, well,
the answer.
I'll tell you, the first step in that process is to get SeaWorld to come and see the place and fall in love with it. And I'm quite sure that they will. They are so far very reluctant to even discuss the matter. But, you know, ultimately, I think they will. I think they will ultimately see the sense of doing this, because it would be a huge plus for them too. You know, instead of, you know, having orcas, as quite frequently happens, die in their tanks, they would have the chance of doing something great for Corky, for orcas in general. You know, they would be able to show Corky on their on a live stream in the SeaWorld parks, for example. You know, I think it would be for SeaWorld to be seen to do something positive for orcas, I think would be a great benefit to them.
How they are seen is very important to them. So I think that is doable, to frame her return as something that they can be happy with and proud of, and show to people. Public opinion is so important. It's how they are seen. They depend on their public image, and so our route to SeaWorld is through public opinion, it seems to me, and so important, and it's so well underway. Ever since, I mean, your efforts and our efforts and Blackfish the movie, and everybody's efforts have really been, growing exponentially over the years. And I think there is a huge public understanding that captivity is terrible for orcas in particular, for dolphins, and for large, wide-ranging mammals in general. It's a terrible thing, but for orcas in particular, they are so wide-ranging, and there is no way to contain them in a tiny bowl for display that is anything close to what we would call humane, to any kind of treatment that is that equates to their natural life, to their ability to be happy, to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. They can't do that in a tank. And I think that is so so much better understood now across the country. But I think, we still need to ramp that up even more. And there's more ways to do that, and we're doing it through TokiTV and many other ways. In that vein, my fascination is with that moment of your epiphany. You briefly touched on it there in your intro, but I think that time, I've read it, I've read the legend, but here we have the living legend in front of us. And I would love to hear more about those times at Vancouver Aquarium in the late 60s, when you came in as a naive PhD in psychology, as I understand, and hired to conduct, I don't know what they were, behavior awareness experiments. I would just love to hear some more detail on that, because I believe that epiphany that you had, that showed you that these creatures should not be contained in a tank. And that understanding that came to you is the understanding that the world is catching up to now. But I think that was a really pivotal moment when you had that realization and you acted on it. And you said, you proclaimed to the world, she shouldn't be here. That was Scanna, I believe.
Yeah,
But I'm not sure. I don't have the details like you do. So I would love to sort of hear sort of the chronology of how that happened. If you could, indulge me. Be
yeah, for sure.
for
Well,
everyone.
yeah, of course, a number of things happened to me. Um, I think the first thing that happened when I applied for the job, uh, it was in the psychiatry department at UBC, and they had a lab called the Kinsman Laboratory of Neurological Research. And I applied for a job there that involved half-time neurological research on campus, and half-time behavioral research with Scanna, who was a newly captured orca at the Vancouver Aquarium. And I didn't know anything at all about orcas at that point. So I asked Ken Norris. Ken Norris is a very famous cetacean scientist who was on the UCLA campus. And I asked Ken, what should I propose? And Ken said, well, we know quite a lot about audition in cetaceans, but we don't know anything about vision. So he suggested that I propose to study vision in orcas. And so that's what I did. I made a proposal, and they invited me to come up, and I went and I met with Dr. Pat McGeer, who was the head of the Kinsman lab at the time. And when I walked into his lab, it was sort of a rectangular sort of space, and on the left-hand side, as I walked in, there was a huge jar of formalin with a massive brain floating in it. And it was the brain of Moby Doll, who was the first orca captured in British Columbia. And that was an interesting story. There's books and movies about it and everything. But Moby Doll was intended to be a display. They wanted to kill an orca, make a display in the Vancouver Aquarium of a life-size model of the whale. And there was a harpoon gun set up at a place on Salt Spring wasn't Salt Spring. In any event, on Saturna Island, I think it was. Yeah. So it was a harpoon set up on a place called East Point, I think, on Saturna Island. And the guy who was the harpooner sat there for ages. I think it might have been a couple of weeks, and nothing happened. And then finally, this whale came and sat virtually right under the harpoon, and he fired it, and it struck the whale in the sort of the back part of the neck, not killing him. That meant it was a bit of a dilemma, I guess, because they really wanted a dead whale, but they had a live one. But they towed this whale across Georgia Strait into Vancouver Harbor and housed him in a pen. And at that point, people were, in those stage, people were terrified of orcas. They were called killer for good reason, I guess, because they're massive creatures, enormous power, and so forth. And people were literally terrified of them if they were in a boat and an orca passed by. In any event, Moby Doll, as he became known, lived, I think, for about 3 months in that tank. But in the course of that, people who would started by trying to feed him by putting a fish on the end of a pole and dangling it over the tank, ended up hand feeding him and realizing that he wasn't a terrifying creature at all. In any event, Moby Doll died, and Dr. McGeer, who's he's actually a fantastic neurophysiologist, was able to take the brain of Moby Doll and preserve it. And that was the brain that I saw when I walked into his lab to be interviewed. It was a massive brain. It's about almost 4 times, 3.5, 4 times as big as a human brain. And the surface of the brain was covered in these dark lines that represented the infolding in the cerebral hemispheres, which are the highest, largest, most advanced portions of the brain. And I mean, the question in my mind immediately was, what on earth does this creature do with this brain? And I suppose that's what I've been thinking about ever since. But on the shelf above it were a bunch of smaller jars, and in them were human brains. And the human brains looked puny in comparison. So that was food for thought about that at that time. It still is for me, you know. And orcas have possessed their modern brain for at least 20 million years. That's another thing to think about, you know. I wonder what we humans will be like if we manage to make it for 20 more million years. I'm doubtful about that, by the way. But anyway, that's where I started, and I took this job, and I went to the aquarium, and I set up an experiment to try and figure out how well an orca can see. It's a pretty simple question. What is their visual acuity like? And I decided to start working with a kind of trying out experimental procedures with a dolphin. Her name was Diana. And she was kept alone in a back pool at the aquarium. It was called a research pool. And I set up a piece of apparatus which had a couple of slots on either side of a board in the middle that I could drop cards into. And the cards consisted of vertical black lines, a couple of them with different spaces between them. What I would do is vary the width of the space between them. And there were 2 paddles on the front of the apparatus that she could press with her head and lift up. And if she got it right, I would throw half a dead herring into the pool to reward her. And it actually took Diana a long time to learn that initial visual discrimination between a card with 1 line on it and a card with 2 lines on it. But eventually she got it, and she was very, very reliable and consistent performer. But one thing happened that was quite interesting, and that was that after, you know, I threw this herring into the pool to reward her, and she picked them up for a while. But after a while, she didn't eat them. She just piled them up in the middle of the pool, and would come back later and eat them. And that got me thinking about motivation. She's very willing, and it obviously wasn't just willingness because she was being fed. And even I went from there to Sk'ana's pool, and I built a different kind of an apparatus. It also had 2 levers, and I dropped cards in one side or the other. And I decided to do a much longer experiment, looking at the question of visual generalization. And so I had a very wide range of gaps in the cards that I presented. And there was literally thousands of trials involved in doing that. And I ran 72 trials a day. Now I'd go down to the aquarium before the staff arrived there in the morning, and I'd do this little experiment. And Sk'ana was very, very, very patient, I suppose would be a good description, until one day, from one trial to the next, her behavior reversed. Instead of pressing the lever on the side of where there was a 2-line card, she did the opposite. She pressed it on the 1-line card. And it was a wrong answer, of course. And she did that for the entire session. And then next day she did it again. And the next day she did it again. The next day she did it again. And I had set it up so I had an automatic fish feeder on the side of the pool that would, instead of me throwing a half a dead herring into the pool, it would push a half a dead herring into the pool. And I was trying to actually remove the human element from the experiment, mostly conducting it remotely with equipment that was in my lab. In any event, I looked at this behavior and thought, whew, you know, it totally ruined my experiment for one thing. But another thing, I thought, well, maybe there are other instances in the literature about this kind of behavior. And I went looking, I couldn't find anything. And so ultimately, I sort of labeled it a spontaneous reversal of behavior. And I thought, well, maybe the question is motivation. And so instead of a half a dead herring, I tried other things. I gave her a chance to swim around the pool or jump or, you know, other kinds of things, retrieve a ball or whatever, you know. And her performance came up to about 50% with that kind of regime. And so I was still thinking about the question of motivation. And in the back of my mind was the knowledge, very clear knowledge that orcas are not primarily visual creatures, they're acoustic creatures. And I thought, well, maybe an acoustic reward might work. And so at that point, I stopped working with Scanner. I went on to work with another orca who was kept in that back pool that I told you about with Diana. And he was a young orca, maybe about 6 months old. He'd been captured in another capture in Pender Harbor, and he was in that back pool by himself. I think there might have been. I think there was a silver company at that point. But I had told I wanted to use what I'd learned with Scanner to work with him. So I told people not to do it, not to socialize with him. Basically to leave him alone. Very not very kind of me. Anyway, he was sitting in this one corner of the pool day and night. And so I decided to perform an experiment in which I could see if I could encourage him to do different kinds of things, like swim around the pool. So I set up an experiment which was an underwater speaker in one corner of the pool. It's a very crude underwater speaker, and it was connected to my lab, which was next door, and I had a bunch of equipment in my lab in which I could play different sounds. I had a waveform generator, for example, that produced different kinds of waveforms, and I had a record player in the stack of records. And so I set up this experiment in which I turned on a 3 kilohertz tone, and I said to him, anything you do, I said to him, okay, if you move out of that corner of the pool, I will turn on a sound as a reward. And I started off with different kinds of waveforms and whatnot. I turn on this 3 kilohertz tone, he'd move out of the pool, and I'd turn on a sound. And it really took only a couple of days for him to be swimming sort of calmly, sedately around the pool, listening to sounds. I fairly quickly stopped using just pure waveforms and whatnot and went on to using my stack of records. And it didn't take me very long before I sort of said, okay, that's pretty clear that acoustic rewards are working. So I said to him, okay, anything you do, which is not sitting in that corner of the pool, I reward with sound. And under that circumstances, his behavior just radically changed. Instead of, sort of swimming quietly around the pool, he'd charge down one side of the pool and it was a small pool. It's only about 50 feet long, 30 feet wide, something like that. He'd charge down one side of the pool and hurl his body into the air, do a barrel roll, dive back in. He'd swim around, slapping the pool with his spectral fins on one side or the other. And it was just so impressive what he was doing behaviorally. And the other part of it was how quickly it happened. You know, I think when I started working with Scanner, it took something like 600 trials for her to get the initial discrimination between 1 and 2 lines. And he did this whole switch in his behavior in a couple of sessions. So it's really very impressive like that. And a few things happened along the way. One is one day I was playing him a recording of Ravi Shankar's sitar music, and he seemed to love that. So the next day, I thought, oh, okay, I'll give it to him again. And so I did that. I turned on this 3 kilohertz tone, and he came out of the pool, and I turned on Ravi Shankar, and he got halfway down the side of the pool, and he stopped. And he turned around and he went back to the corner. And he stayed there until I turned something else on. And that told me that he had remembered enough of that complicated music that Ravi Shankar was playing from the day before, not to need or want to hear it again right then. And that told me something about the complexity of the acoustic brain that orcas possess. Anyway, I went back to Spong. She did a whole bunch of other things for me. And ultimately, I concluded that this was just so totally unfair for us to be keeping these whales in that impoverished circumstance that I spoke out against it. And that lost me my job, and I went on to do what I'm doing now.
As I recall, there were stories that you played flute for Skana for a while. Was that accurate?
Oh yeah,
Did you
for
play
sure.
flute?
Yeah, you know, she loved music. I bring people down to play music for them, and they loved it. I played the flute at that point, and yeah, exactly, yeah, correct.
Nice. You mentioned that you told that young orca in the back pool what you would like. That perplexes me. How did you communicate that? How did you tell him that you would play a sound if he came out of the corner, for instance?
Oh no, it was just a behavioral thing. You know, his habit was just to stay in that corner of the pool, and it's like, you know, any kind of behavioral manipulation where you wait for something to happen and then you produce something that's reward. So
You reward it when it
stay.
happens.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So I mean, it's sort of shaping behavior. It's a traditional kind of behavioral technique. You know, you reward something that's sort of in line with the behavior that you want.
Okay.
Anyway,
Can
I went from that, you know, observation of captivity to understand a little bit ultimately about who Corky was. And she was, you know, her mum was released from that capture, and she went on to have other kids, babies, who were, 2 of them were Corky's brother and sister, who are still alive and still swimming out in the ocean. And one of my hopes, I think, even though Corky has not met her family before, is that when she comes back, she will meet them again. She'll meet her family again. And that, I think, will be a profound moment, not just for me, but for all of us who are interested in what orcas are, because I think we'll learn a lot.
I think so too. Can I play that video you sent me of Corky's family? Go
Yeah,
ahead and
sure.
play that now. Okay,
Yeah.
Here we go. Gorgeous.
It is gorgeous. It's that piece of video was recorded by Megan Hocken Bennett, who's one of the young people who's been working with us for many years. She has a job, if you will. She spends August, sometimes longer than that, sitting on a platform at a place called Craycroft Point, which is at the western end of an island called Craycroft Island in the Johnston Strait area of northern Vancouver Island in British Columbia. And Megan sits there, and she has a fantastic platform to put her camera on. It's a little a square of a platform that is embedded into the rock, so it's totally stable. And she's able to sit there and use her video camera and create these gorgeous, gorgeous imageries.
That's gorgeous. I just want to point people to OrcaLab on Facebook, which is Dr. Spong's group there. And the first thing it says on there, which I was really struck by, and it sounds like you, is a quote by you that says, "My hope is to bring people closer to nature without disrupting her." That is so beautiful. That's just so beautiful.
Yes. Yeah, thanks for that. Yeah, the website actually is orcalab.org. And if you go to it, you can click on live audio, and you can listen to exactly what we listen to in our lab. Or you can click on live video. And we have a partnership with explore.org, which is it's actually a philanthropic endeavor in the sense that it's a part of the Annenberg Foundation, and it's a man named Charlie Weingarten created it, and it consists of live cameras in many, many different parts of the world, many different environments, most of them in the wild, and it has an incredible ability to show people what animals are like live in the wild. Anyway, go to explore.org and have fun.
Joe?
Yeah, hey, Paul, thanks for sharing some of the story about Sk'aliCh'elh. You told me things just now that I had never heard before, so it's really fascinating. Was the male, was that Hayek? Who was?
Hayek, yes, I called him Tung Ren at the time, but yeah, he became Hayek.
Became Hayek, yeah. He was the first one who, well, after Namu, he was the first one I met, I guess, as an adult, as a 19-year-old. I spent a little time just through the window, locking eyes with him for quite a long time.
Yeah, there was obviously another sad story, you know.
Yeah. But, you know, so that there's just so many things I want to talk to you about, as usual. But so, first of all, were there any recordings made during the captures when Corky was captured?
Yes.
Acoustic, underwater? Yeah.
I actually, I had a very, very crude hydrophone at the time. I think it was just an ordinary microphone with a plastic bag over it, and put it in the water. Yes, I did make some recordings.
Yeah. Okay. I'd love to hear those sometime if you still have them.
Yeah, we do. And I'm not sure if we've used them recently, but yeah, we do.
Yeah. And do you know, is SeaWorld, are they recording sounds of the animals that they have now? And is there any way to get those recordings?
I do not believe they have a hydrophone in their tank. But there's interesting. Last year, we got a video from somebody who had been interacting with Corky right at the edge of the tank, and Corky was vocalizing. And Corky was vocalizing a whole different bunch of sounds that she was making, but some of them were really pure A5 calls, and so we know that she still uses and is capable of using the sounds that she heard and used when she was a baby.
That's excellent. Well, especially what you had just mentioned about the well, with Hayek, remembering Ravi Shankar's piece, right? And just instantly, all that information is there, and it seems to be retained incredibly well. Well, so Corky does socialize with some of the other whales that she's in the tank with. Is that right?
Yes, of course, and she's quite close to at least one of them.
Would there be any talk about moving a friend with her?
Well, you know, if you could convince the Canadian government to do that, or you convince SeaWorld to let a couple of their whales go, it would be great, of course, but it would be a very, very long shot to convince either Canada or SeaWorld to work along with this. You know, if Corky comes back to Double Bay and does well there and is being looked after by SeaWorld, and SeaWorld gets enthusiastic about this, who knows what will happen. But at this point, we're having difficulty in even convincing SeaWorld to visit. And that's a big unknown at this point, you know. And if people watching this want to do something for Corky, I'd suggest writing to SeaWorld and say, please visit Double Bay and see what kind of a sanctuary is being built there for her, you know.
Right.
And that's what I wanted to ask too, because a lot of people are asking on the chat, have they, she'll need to come with a companion, and we know the first step is getting SeaWorld to have some sort of agreement, but what can we do? People want to go and organize more protests, and, depending on the type of protest, I think sometimes they just ignore it because they're so used to it. But coming up with something creative like that, not going and calling for shutting them down, but calling for them to come visit. I think that's a nice approach, Dr. Spong. So thank you. And if you have any other suggestions on, people are going to go out there and protest, but what should the message be right now?
Well, I think the real message is that SeaWorld can benefit from being involved in this. At this point, especially after Blackfish came out, they got a whole bunch of hard knocks, and they need to do something that's positive for them and to sort of recover their sort of visibility and recognition in the public mind. And I think people are going back to SeaWorld at this point. And I think SeaWorld is transitioning its business away from captive orcas. Their life is limited. The California State Commission has prohibited them from breeding orcas in captivity. And that puts a hard limit to the amount of time that they're going to continue doing this, So they need a different business model. And they're moving on to create rides and stuff like that people are enjoying. And I just think that, if they look a little bit into their future, they'll see that they're not going to have orcas in captivity any longer. I don't know if it's 10 years or 20 years or whatever from now, but when the last orca dies in their tanks, that's it. And so I think that at a certain point, SeaWorld's going to look at what it's doing, and it's going to understand that it has to change its business model. And I think getting involved with Corky could be a huge benefit to them.
Yep, I agree. We had Antonio Fins on about a month ago, and that's the exact conversation we were having. We were kind of talking about Orlando, but we're talking about SeaWorld in general. Is it's phasing out. People don't think that's cool anymore, and so they could build their parks to have more roller coasters and maybe some 4D things that are coming out now, but really they could save themselves. I would go ride their roller coasters if they decided to send their orcas to sanctuaries. It would just make them look good. Yeah. How close Double Bay? How close is Double Bay to being done? We had Michael Reppy on, but it's been about a year. Do you know where they're at with that?
I'm sorry, say that again.
where they are with Double Bay Sanctuary? Like how far
Oh,
along
I
are
see. Yeah, no, it's a work in progress. I think it's probably at least a year away from being functional. There are things that have already happened which are hugely helpful. Uh, the bay needs to be clean of pollutants, and I think that work is progressing. And the lodge itself is beautiful. You know, it's a fantastic place. It's got, as I mentioned, it's got all these rooms that people can stay in. And I think that the idea that Michael is working with is to maybe be able to do things like, besides housing SeaWorld staff, being able to do things like seminars and symposiums and things like that, which would bring people together to discuss issues that are pertinent to oceans and so forth. I think that's part of what he's doing. I think Michael is working very closely with First Nations, and that they would ultimately be, hopefully, ultimately be involved in what happens at the sanctuary. So yeah, there are things happening, moving along. I would say it's a huge project. You know, putting together something like this, costly, time-consuming, and it needs to be done right.
If I can jump in, what you just mentioned about First Nations, have you spoken with the people who were involved with Springer? Because I know there was a strong involvement 21 years ago. How do they feel?
Positive, absolutely positive. I think everybody wants, including First Nations people, they regard orcas as their kin. You know,
right.
they're relatives, and they want their relative to come home. So yes, absolutely. But when Springer came, you know, I don't know how many of you guys know the story about Springer, but she was a little orca, probably less than 2 years old, and she got lost. You know, her mom died, so she became an orphan, and she became lost, and she wandered around, and she hooked up with some orcas for a while who weren't her relatives, and then she kept wandering and ultimately ended up near Seattle in Washington State. And she got into a habit of following a ferry backwards and forwards to a neighboring island. And people were aware that she was an orca and probably thought she doesn't have a place and so forth. And then finally, one of the researchers, David Bain, made a recording of her voice and sent it around. And we received a copy of it, and Helena, my wife, heard it and said, "I know that voice." And she went rummaging through our stash, incredible stack of tape recordings from the years, and she found a recording that had been made of her mother when she was 5 years old, and it was exactly the same voice that Springer had. So we knew where she belonged. And not long after that, a photo was found by another researcher in Alaska which showed Springer with her mother. And so it was absolutely certain about where she belonged. And after that, a really great project was put together, which involved scientists on both sides of the border. Obviously, both Canada and the United States were involved in this. And so there was a scientific consultation set up to discuss what might happen, which ultimately led to the conclusion that she should go home. There was very many thoughts about the condition that she was in. She had a kind of breath called ketosis, which is sort of a symptom of worms in the stomach and so forth. And so when she was captured, and then she was moved to a pen still in Puget Sound, where she was held, I think, for about a month. She was fed live fish, not by hand, but through a chute that went down into the pool, so she didn't see them. She was fed medication to deal with her wounds and so forth. And so in that period of a month, she recovered her health. And then ultimately, she was transported on a very large catamaran. She was put into a tank. It was actually donated by SeaWorld. In sort of sitting on a bed of foam with the water over her in the tank. So she was safe. And she was transported up to a place called Dong Chong Bay, which is on Hanson Island, just around the corner from OrcaLab. A number of things happened. First of all, in terms of First Nations involvement, they had to give permission for the pens to be located in Dong Chong Bay, because Hanson Island is their territory. They were very enthusiastic about the whole process. There were 2 pens in Dong Chong Bay, one to house Springer and another one to house live fish. So the First Nations caught the fish and stocked the pen in the bay so she could be fed live fish when she came home. When the event was happening, First Nations people paddled out from Alert Bay in canoes. Women in regalia danced for her on the side of the pool. The chief of the Namgis First Nation came down. His name, Chief Bill Cranmer is his name. And he gave a welcoming speech to Springer when she came home. And, it was so interesting. When Springer first got into the home water, she just started leaping out of the water over and over again. She was so happy to be home, I guess. We were listening. We had we have a bunch of hydrophones that we listen to the surrounding area with. And that night, we could hear some of Springer's relatives coming from Johnson Strait through Blackney Pass. Blackney Pass is sort of the waterway that connects Blackfish Sound and Johnston Strait. We could hear some of Corky's relatives, not her immediate mom's family, but some other very close relatives coming through Blackney Pass towards Blackfish Sound, where Dong Chong Bay is located. And so we were in radio communication with David Howard, who was a friend of ours who was sitting on the edge of Dong Chong Bay listening through a hydrophone and recording what was going on. And as they connected, the whales were out of earsight as they came through, but when they came into range of Dong Chong Bay, where Springer was being held, and she heard them, she got so excited. It was incredible. She got so excited she couldn't enunciate her calls. In any event, we knew at that moment that absolutely she was going to be okay. And the next day, she was released. So that was another interesting story. But anyway, she was released, and it took about 3 weeks for her to become comfortable in her family again. And she's gone on since then. She has 2 kids now, and she's a matriarch, and she's a incredible whale. And we don't see her this year, but we see her most years with her family. She's doing incredibly well. And that was I think a milestone really in this whole saga.
About that, Paul, I saw the video of Springer bolting out of that pen to be with her family. And for a split second there, I thought I saw that she had a fish in her mouth. Have you ever heard anybody else think that? Or was I just imagining?
Yeah, that's totally correct. As she got out of the bed, it took a while. She's sitting in a sling, and there were a bunch of guys in the water holding her, and then the gate was open. And as the gate opened, she grabbed 2 fish and went off with them.
Excellent confirmation. for all these years. I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah, no, it's a true
That seemed to
story.
me to be a kind of a ceremonial offering to share fish with her family, a sort of a gesture to them.
I
You
suspect
think?
she ate them.
Or maybe, yeah, or she was just hungry. I don't know.
No,
I
she
just
had a
love that so much. She was so excited she couldn't even enunciate her calls.
Yeah.
She's so
she
cute.
could no, she was so excited. She was so excited when she finally got back into her home water, felt that water. She just couldn't stop leaping out of the water. And then when she heard her family, she she just could not stop. She could not speak properly. She was so excited. But you know, she was only in that pen for 19 hours. That's how long it took from the time she came home to the time she was released. That's all it took.
Gosh, Dr. Paul, we could talk to you for hours. And so if you have to rush off, please just stop us because the stories are just fascinating. And I appreciate you spending this time with us. I really do.
You're very welcome. No, I appreciate you doing this, and I'm quite sure going to be helpful to Corky. Thank you very much. Take good care of her.
Yes, no. And I have a question. That banner, where is it?
Well, it's massive, you know, and it's Michael Reppy, the guy who's I talked to about doing Double Bay, has it, I think, in storage. He lives in Sausalito in California, and I think he has it in storage there, I think. And it comes out, or bits of it come out on occasion when there are things happening that it could be useful for.
It might be time.
It's safe. I think we have there's a Hanson Island section to the banner that we have.
I was going to say it might be time for it to come out. Do you mind if I share a portion of that video that talks about the banner?
Oh, absolutely. Go for it.
Let me click a couple of buttons here to give me a minute. And let's see. I got to go back and forth between tabs here.
And a demonstration inside the next day. Corky's best chance now lies in a wonderful work of art called Corky's Freedom Banner. Thousands of patches of cloth express the feelings of children around the world for Corky. Sewn together, they form a huge and powerful message about freedom. On Mother's Day in 1996, Corky's Freedom Banner was displayed around SeaWorld in San Diego. Corky's Freedom Banner was then over 2 kilometers long. 14,000 people from 15 countries had contributed messages to it. 100 volunteers had their hands full raising Corky's banner. It was an amazing day. The next step came in 1997, when Corky's magnificent banner went on a tour of Europe, visiting major cities in Germany, Austria, Switzerland, England, and Ireland. The children's energy, their sympathy, understanding, and commitment to Corky made each event a huge success. Corky's banner was draped around some of Europe's oldest statues and monuments. Now, with the help of yet more children from around the world, Corky's Freedom Banner is growing again. In springtime 1999, it took a symbolic journey from California, where Corky has spent her captive years, to her ancestral home in British Columbia, where her family still lives. Corky's banner and her dream traveled on board a bus called Freedom that was beautifully painted with images of Corky on one side and Lolita on the other. The journey began in San Francisco on a windy day, with Thursday's child getting ready to sail the seas for Corky. Country Joe McDonald sang old songs to inspire a new generation fighting for an ancient cause, freedom. On to Arcata for Memorial Day. Next, north to the welcome of Washington State, where under the Capitol's Great Dome, a wonderful joining of hands on behalf of Corky between government and First Nations youth.
My wife Karen and I were out sailing one day, and we happened to come across capture of orcas for the amusement parks in Southern California. And what we saw was terrible. What we saw was gruesome. What we saw was wrong.
Across the border, back into Canada to Vancouver, where the harbour waters and city skyline with huge coastal mountains looming behind provided a perfect backdrop for Corky's banner. Pushing north again, Freedom paused at Pender Harbour, where Corky's journey began so long ago. Next, Freedom was ferried across the waters of Georgia Strait to Denman Island, where Corky's cause was joined by a community fighting to preserve its forests. The banner was strung among the trees, and the community hall was festooned inside and out for an evening dinner and dance. Freedom moved on, up to Alert Bay, the old coastal village that is called home of the killer whale, because orca families have long been known to visit its waters. Corky's family is one. There, July 10th was declared Corky's Freedom Day. A crowd gathered in the village square to hear the mayor and chief offer encouraging words for Corky and to listen to her song. It was another joining of hands for Corky.
Corky has committed no crime. Even the most hardened criminals are freed after 25 years.
There's much more to that. And Dee is watching, and she says, I watch the Corky documentary once a week. So I'm going to put that link in the chat for everyone. If you have not seen this documentary, you should. And when we talk about the banner, I mean, I think Dee and Brandy, and I'm sure we got a few folks who would be happy to coordinate something to bring that back out again. Just feels like there's time. Christina?
Well, I was thinking maybe we could add to it. That's what I was thinking. Add to it, and maybe start a writing campaign for people to write to SeaWorld.
Asking them to go visit. I think that would be beautiful.
Yes, that could be very helpful. Thank you. And I
had a thought to add to that too. Was instead of the fighting against SeaWorld for the protesting, like against, maybe the posters could be like, look at this. What about, to show the sanctuary, show the pictures of not this, so it's like they're fighting for her instead of against SeaWorld. But
yeah,
it's
I like
just
that. Yeah. Like that.
No, I think
that's what you said. I remember you said to help SeaWorld understand how it would benefit them, right? Because it would really benefit them because the orca capture days are over. So yeah, I think those are some great things we can do. Woohoo!
Someone even said earlier in the chat, they said, just if it helps SeaWorld, call it SeaWorld's Double Bay Sanctuary. Like whatever kudos they need, give it to them. And if they partner in and agree to this, they should get some kudos. Like so yeah, like frame it in a way that works for them. Let's give them their woohoos if they do it. Dee and Brandy are over here coordinating in the chat. So Christina, I have a feeling you're going to have to. I have a feeling you're going to have to coordinate a meeting this week so we can figure out what's next and how we can support Paul and Corky. I do want to mention Tim Ramitis. Tim has a group on Facebook. It's called Northern Resident Orca Corky 2A16 group. If you're not following that on Facebook, go check it out. Tim is a wealth of knowledge when it comes to Corky. He'll just if you have a question, Tim will answer it. He knows everything about her. So Dr. Paul, I'm sure he would be thrilled if you join that group. I'll send you the link directly to your email. And let's just, it's always time, right? And we're all in our healing process. We have to acknowledge it because we're all still hurting over Toki, Sk'aliCh'elh-tenaut's. And if there's a way to funnel any energy and help this out. I mean, we got to support the sanctuaries that are in process. So Whale Sanctuary Project, they're hoping for next year, Double Bay hoping for next year. I will support any and all sanctuary in progress. So let's continue to do that and figure out how we fight for this, for the animals.
Yes, thank you very much. And I should tell you guys that I was really, really hoping for Toki to come home, because I thought that if she makes it, and I'm so sad she didn't, but I thought if she makes it, that's a huge boost to Corky's chances. And now,
we were so close.
Corky's the last, almost the last. There's one other whale from those early capture days. His name is Shemek. He's in Argentina, but he doesn't have the same kind of route. It's a harder route, I think, for him. And Corky can come home, I think, fairly straightforwardly. The transport is probably the riskiest part of it. But I think, SeaWorld has moved whales from coast to coast for so long. I'm pretty sure they're very good, very confident about doing that safely. But if Corky can come home, and I absolutely do believe she will come home, I think it'll be a huge, huge step forward, not just for SeaWorld and for our understanding, but I think we'll learn things about orcas that will really, really open our eyes. That's partly what I'm looking forward to.
Thanks, Dr. Paul.
Not if, when.
When, exactly. I hope you come back on with us as things progress for Corky. You guys, if you haven't followed OrcaLab, go to orcalab.org or go check out OrcaLab on Facebook and definitely hear some of the recordings. Joe, thanks for hanging out with us again and for connecting me with Dr. Spong. I appreciate it. Anybody have anything they want to say? Alejandro, I'm glad you're with us. You're quiet, but thanks for being with us.
I was listening. Yeah, it's time to retire Corky, and I hope SeaWorld can work and engage in this cause, to bring her home, to bring Corky home.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you, Paul.
We're meeting next week. We are still meeting next week on Christmas Eve. We might be wearing more sparkly hats. I don't know. But yeah, so we'll see you guys next week. Thanks again, Dr. Spong. And whenever you and Helena want to come on, you're absolutely welcome.
Okay. Take good care, everyone.
Guys, have a great week.
Bye.
Okay.
Toki, Ulysses, Corky, and the 55 plus orca that's in captivity. This song is dedicated to you. Out on the ocean swimming free, it's where I'm supposed to be. Not living my life in captivity. That kind of life is not for me. Take me home, where I belong. Out on the deep blue sea, swimming up to 100 miles a day with my family. Take me home. You took me away from my family. You took me away from my home, where I'm supposed to roam. You took me away from my home. Take me home, where I belong. Out on the blue sea, not in aquarium, not in captivity. me away from my family, who loved me and taught me. Take me home. I wanna go. I wanna be take me home, where I belong. I wanna swimming up to 100 miles a day with my family, not in captivity. It's not for me. I wanna be free. I wanna be free. I wanna live free. Roaming the ocean. Roaming the ocean. Take me home.